Okay, so welcome. It's my great pleasure to be here with all of you. I'm going to share some about de-escalation and conflict management from an interpersonal neurobiology perspective. Let's see, let me make it a slideshow. This is a presentation for the Clackamas Workforce Partnership. My name is Casey Sims. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a counselor and instructor at Clackamas Community College. It's nice to connect with people that serve others in my community in much the same way. So I want to thank you for choosing to spend this time together today. I'm honored that so many people wanted to join us. While I'm grateful for the opportunity to present on this topic, I also know that there's much I can learn from all of you. I care deeply about making our time together helpful and positive. I am open to feedback and have been using the growth mindset to receive it gracefully. So please don't hesitate to contact me if there's anything you'd like me to be aware of. There's my email and my phone number, and I'll put that in the chat towards the end. We'll see it again. So we're going to begin with a gratitude exercise, a very fast gratitude exercise using the chat feature. Reflect briefly upon something for which in this very moment you're feeling grateful. It doesn't matter if it's big or small or serious or silly, specific or vague. Just choose something, anything that you are feeling grateful for, and type it into the chat now. Right on. I appreciate that. Okay. Thank you, everyone. So why lead with the gratitude activity? I believe engaging in situations involving conflict requires even more mental and physical resources than normal. Therefore, being more resilient when the intensity of an interaction increases is important. One way to be more resilient later in the day is to engage in a gratitude practice in the morning. Gratitude practices, it's similar to how exercise in the morning can bring you benefits in the afternoon. A gratitude practice can support your balance later in the day when tense situations occur. So what do you do or might you do to foster a gratitude practice? How might this help later when a conflict arises? What I like to do for gratitude practices is I like to write postcards. In this Zoom era, I've been writing a postcard and then I take a picture of it, the front and the back, and I email it to somebody. And so if they want to read my message, they have to look at the picture and read my little note. I also love sending postcards in the mail. What I find is that if I engage in that, if I write that postcard to send it to somebody, even if they don't get it, I have more reserves for myself later. And then when maybe a difficult situation arises, I have a deeper well of resources to be able to navigate something that might be tricky or intense. So I think that gratitude relates to conflict management in that way. There's a lot of science behind gratitude. Here's a particular study, Gratitude Science in Education. I have a link. I'm going to put it in the chat in case you're interested in learning about it. Since I work at Clackamas Community College, I'm particularly interested in how gratitude practices can help students. And so that's why I chose this one, but here's a link to that. But I think that that's a good way to steel yourself for possible difficult conversations later in the day, or be more prepared for that. I liked this quote a lot. Gratitude is a vaccine and antitoxic. and an antiseptic. So thank you everybody for sharing your gratitude in the chat. And I'd just like to encourage everybody to think about how engaging in something like that can help when you're engaging in a situation that is, has conflict and can bring heightened intensity or emotional states. So our agenda for today, we had a little pre-presentation exercise. What prior experiences do we all bring to the room? I think there's a richness in and learning from all the different experiences that people have. All of those experiences are with you when you engage in conflict. We had a little introduction. Again, I'm Casey Sims with Clackamas Community College. I'm a counselor and instructor there. And then we had a gratitude exercise, and then we're going over the agenda, which is right now in this present moment. We're going to talk a little bit about common definitions. I'm going to share an approach that I have adopted. I call this triple stance with you. Then we'll have a small group discussion about your approaches to conflict management. Then I'll have a brief overview of the field of interpersonal neurobiology, and especially the aspects of that field that I think are especially relevant to conflict. And we'll cover a couple of the specific concepts, including the triangle of well-being and neuroception from polyvagal theory. We will have a short break with a musical interlude if you choose to listen. Then we'll cover the window of tolerance, another IPMB model, and the river of the mind, and that will close after that. So, contrary to what you might expect, conflict management does not generally refer to just a boxing referee's job description, although I thought that was a pretty apt description for what a boxing referee must end up doing, managing conflict. So I thought it would be good to have some common terminology. Conflict management is the process of limiting the negative aspects of conflict while increasing the positive aspects of conflict. I liked that definition because it reminded me that there can be positive outcomes to conflict, and that it doesn't just have to be something that you shy away from. The aim of conflict management is to enhance learning and group outcomes, including effectiveness of performance in an organizational setting. Properly managed conflict can improve group outcomes. So I thought that was a pretty optimistic definition. Similarly, de-escalation is a behavior that is intended to prevent escalation of conflicts. It may also refer to approaches in conflict resolution. People may become committed to behaviors that tend to escalate conflict, so specific measures must be taken to avoid such escalation. So I thought it'd be helpful to start with a couple of common definitions around that, although they weren't necessarily what first came to my mind when thinking about these topics. I thought it'd be nice to look at some early conflict management models. One of the earliest ones was 1964. They developed a model that had 5 types: forcing, withdrawing, smoothing, compromising, and problem solving. So they organized it in that context. A later model in 1983 had people's concerns for their own interests, which they called assertiveness, and the concern for the interests of others, which was cooperativeness, and yield a particular conflict management style, with problem solving being the preferred approach. This reminded me of the 4 quadrants of time management that you might be familiar with. So in one quadrant, yielding is low assertiveness, which is low for what yourself, and high cooperativeness. So that is basically giving up on what you want. Problem solving was both high assertiveness and high cooperativeness. So making sure that your own needs are being met, but also having care and concern for the other person's interests. Inaction was maybe pulling away from both what you need and what the other person needed. So obviously not a good approach for that. And contending would be if you were really demanding what you wanted and not paying very close attention to what the other person wants. So that's an earlier model. Another model reframed it as activeness and agreeableness. So activeness is characterized by openly discussing differences of opinion while fully going after their own interest. And high agreeableness is characterized by attempting to satisfy all parties involved. Interestingly, they found that activeness did not have a significant effect on the effectiveness of conflict resolution, but the agreeableness of the conflict management style, whatever it was, did have a positive impact on how groups felt about the way the conflict was managed, regardless of the outcome. So I think it speaks to paying attention to the other person's needs in conflict is going to yield a better outcome. However, none of those definitions really struck at what I thought when the words conflict management, de-escalation were presented to me. For me personally, it brings to mind the notion of handling elevated emotional states involving anger or upset in others. However, what I have come to understand is that it matters just as much to apply what you learn to yourself. It's not just about the other person. In counseling school, we were taught that you can't really help someone get healthier if you aren't relatively healthy yourself. That's one reason that self-care and avoiding burnout are emphasized. I think of it similarly in terms of conflict management. You can't really help someone get calmer than you are. That's why telling someone to calm down seems to be one of the least effective phrases in the English language, followed perhaps by telling my kids, it's time to get off electronics while I'm looking at my own phone. That's another highly ineffective phrase in the English language. So here's the question: when you are at your best, what does that look like, and how does it help you handle conflict compared to when your tank is less full? We'll talk about a couple of models later about that, but what approaches, orientations, and considerations do you keep in mind when you are steadying yourself for a day that might include conflict? This will be a group discussion in a few minutes, so you'll have a little bit time to think about that. We're going to break out into small groups and share that with each other. I came up with a metaphor to reinforce for myself how I want to show up for others in my work and life, and this helps me be mindfully prepared for challenging situations. I want to share it with you as an example, not so that you will adopt it, but so that you might further develop your own. So I like to play basketball, and I chose a basketball metaphor. So maybe you've heard of a basketball, they call it a triple threat. When you catch the ball, you hold it tight with both hands, and you have both feet on the floor, and you're ready to pass, shoot, or dribble. So it's kind of a stance for being ready for the most different types of things. So I took that as a metaphor, and I called it a triple stance. So my triple stance has 3 different positions, just like the triple threat does. The first position is unconditional positive regard. This comes from Carl Rogers. The individual has within him or herself vast resources for self-understanding, for altering his or her self-concept, attitudes, and self-directed behavior. It's created for use in a therapeutic setting, but I think it's relevant in public service or other environments in my view. I think of it as giving the benefit of the doubt as often as possible and communicating that you still have care and concern for people even after they make mistakes, that a conflict doesn't necessarily mean that I don't still have that type of care and concern for people. I believe this relates to conflict management and de-escalation because the people I am working with can hopefully believe that I authentically have their best interests at heart, that I have their back. In my view, this matters most during an experience of conflict. That is when it's hardest and also most important to consider Carl Rogers' approach of unconditional positive regard. So that's my triple stance first position. The second position is a trauma-informed stance. Generally, I find that people I talk with have been through a lot, and these experiences can echo loudly in the present moment, even if seemingly unrelated, especially when considering implicit memory activation. We have explicit memory and implicit memory. Explicit memory would be like, oh, hey, remember this slide just from a few seconds ago? That's explicit memory. It has a timestamp of a few minutes ago. Implicit memory is within your body, and when that gets activated, it's as if it's happening now. And so implicit memories can be really powerful, and it isn't always clear why they might get activated. But when they do, it isn't necessarily tied to a specific time and place. It's as if it's happening now, even though the memory is from something previously. I believe nobody should have to prove how difficult certain past experiences have been. I try to lead interactions by extending an extra dose of grace and compassion as a default, instead of reserving it only for when someone chooses to reveal past traumatic experiences. So for some people, this might merely be pleasant, but for others, it's critical. So I like to try to grant that to everybody. A trauma-informed perspective recognizes that everyone comes into a conflict with a set of prior experiences that have shaped an adapted and adaptive approach for navigating the world. And a trauma-informed perspective seeks to promote accessible and non-re-traumatizing policies and procedures. There's something called secondary traumatization, secondary trauma. Sometimes you have a difficult experience, and then when you're navigating forward from that, something else happens that makes it even worse. And so we want to avoid re-traumatizing or secondary trauma. Triple Stance third position is the concept of universal design. This is universal design is the design of buildings, products, or environments to make them accessible to all people, regardless of age, disability, or other factors. This is a core value for my field of rehabilitation counseling. The way I think about it is make it good for everybody, regardless. That's my stance. Try to make things good for everybody, regardless, make things really accessible. I think universal design is informative for situations involving conflict because, among other things, sometimes a system has unfairly limited people from accessing something. Taking this perspective can help refocus the conflict on addressing the core situation rather than the upset manner in which the inequity was communicated. Sometimes when somebody is upset, it's because something has been unfair. And if they communicate that in a way that makes the other person uncomfortable, then sometimes the conflict becomes more about how they've communicated and not staying focused on what the core issue is. So I try to remember it like that. So triple stance review for me, I try to think of have in my mind at the same time, unconditional positive regard for those I'm serving, trauma-informed approach to set up the policies and procedures and environment so that they aren't re-traumatizing and that they are accessible to all. Again, that might just be pleasant for some people, but it's pretty essential for others. And thinking about universal design, how I can make things good for everybody regardless. When I bring these perspectives with me in my encounter that involves conflict, I feel like I'm bringing my A game in service of my community. I feel that part of my own management of conflict management is to manage to bring my triple stance to difficult situations, though I certainly don't live up to it all the time. It's easy when it's easy, and it's most important when it's hard. What might your triple stance consist of? What might be a different metaphor that you would use? What approaches do you lean on when trying to resolve conflict? So now we're going to take a chance to have a small group discussion about this. I'm going to put you in small groups, and I'm asking you to share. First off, introduce yourself to the wonderful fellow participants that you have today. I'm going to ask you to share what approaches, orientations, and considerations you keep in mind when engaging in conflict. So initially, I'd planned to document the core themes from your discussion on the shared Google Doc that we linked to in the chat. However, because I wasn't as familiar as I needed to be with the editing feature so that everybody can edit that document, when we return from group, I'll ask maybe somebody to type into the chat feature instead some of the core themes that you discussed in your group. I'm going to give about 12 minutes for this activity. And remember to be mindful of the time so that everybody has an opportunity to share, and also honor the confidentiality of any personal stories discussed. Your enthusiastic participation is greatly appreciated. Remember, the core question is share what approaches, orientations, and considerations you keep in mind when engaging in conflict. So I'm now going to break us out into rooms here. Just hold on a second.
And Casey, we have about 48 folks there. Just as an FYI for you, if you want to, I'm not sure how many people in a group you were thinking.
Yeah, I was thinking 5 or 6 maybe. Where's my Brent, my menu for sharing. Okay, I gotta stop sharing. That's what I gotta do. I gotta stop sharing so I can break us into groups. All right.
And I can.
No, I got it now. So I should be able to. No, it doesn't. I don't see the feature of small group. Would you be able to break people into groups for me, Brent, as one of the moderators?
Yep, I can do that. Sorry about that. You should have had that, but. Alrighty, so we've got 44 people. We'll do about, let's say, 8 groups.
Sounds great.
Okay, Sounds good. All right, folks, you are about to get an invitation to join a small group. So I'm going to send that now, and then Casey and I will start the timer for that 12 minutes.
Don't forget to make a new friend.
All right. Hey, Julia.
Hey, I thought this might happen if I had to come in a little bit late, and I was like, what if people are in small groups?
Yeah, no worries. I'm going to send you to one now then. They'll explain, but basically just a quick like, hi, I'm Julia. And then we talked about some approaches to conflict. You know what? I'm going to put you in this small group because they'll explain it better because they're doing that.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yep. Yeah. Hi, Jen. We are just closing. Oh, there we go. Breakout rooms are closing. People are coming back.
Thank you. I'm wife, so I'm just being snoopy.
All right.
All right, welcome back, everybody. I hope you got a chance to meet a couple of new people in your environment and also learn from each other a little bit about how other people, what types of things people keep in mind when engaging with conflict, especially. I'm gonna go ahead and share my screen. For this. So thank you for actively participating in the discussion. There is much to be learned from each other's skills and learned experiences. I think, all of us that have had conflict at different situations, those past jobs that you had, some of those memories are right there with you. Especially for me, I was a manager at Toys R Us a long time ago. Rest in peace, Jeffrey the Giraffe. Sorry about that. But sometimes those types of confrontations are seared into my brain. On the other hand, those, even though they were really uncomfortable and charged, I got through them and I learned from them, and I bring them with me now. I like to think of transferable skills a lot. I work with people, helping get jobs sometimes, and transferable skills is a really important concept for that. I think about if I were to have a game show, it'd be a transferable skills game show, and I'd say, draw a connection between being a lifeguard and being a counselor, go. And people would try to list all the different transferable skills, because that's a skill in and of itself. So I think that the conflict from other experiences that you've had, especially some of the other jobs, maybe especially a type of situation where someone was upset with you for something that wasn't your fault, that you don't even have the power to change. Those are pretty untenable situations, but you learn from them, and they inform you about how to approach future type situations. So thank you, everybody, for participating in that. Let's see. Let's move on. So from current slide. Now we're going to talk a little bit about the field of interpersonal neurobiology. What is interpersonal neurobiology? Well, it's a field that I love. I've been learning about it for the last several years now, and I found it really transformative. It's a meta framework of consilience between scientific fields. So consilience, we'll talk about that in a second, but it has to do with aligning between different scientific fields. So IPMB is a meta framework between different fields and a value for subjective experience. So I want to share with you some concepts and models from the field of IPMB that strike me as relating to the experience of conflict. So let's start with a value on subjective experience, because how does that fit in with science? Well, remember the blue gold dress phenomenon from a few years ago? It was all over. Some people see this and they say, oh, it's blue. Some people see it, they say it's gold. It was a really big popular social media discussion a few years ago. So we can learn about why our brains might see the dress as one color or the other, but we also have our own experience with it. I got really deep into reading about this and read about a physicist and a doctor who had a little article about, the cones in our eyes and the light refraction, and those are the scientific reasons that people would see it different colors. But I also reflected on the people that wrote those articles saw this dress as a one color or the other themselves. So they weren't divorced from the experience just because they were able to describe the science behind it. So IPMB acknowledges and honors the subjective experience also with applying consilience between different scientific fields. The concept of all ways of knowing, which includes subjective experience, scientific research, etc., is especially important when considering the experience of conflict. All of us have had conflicts that escalate in one way or another, And the memories of those experiences can emerge sometimes profoundly when we are confronted with a new conflict. We can't simply dispassionately apply a technique we read about without also having the experiences intersect with what we know from our own past conflicts. This is happening simultaneously within each of us and the person with whom you are engaging. The trauma-informed approach can help us increase empathy for both ourselves and the other person by acknowledging the likely presence of past difficult experiences. All ways of knowing, of course, applies to the other person as well. This is a great resource for IPMB. It's my very favorite book. I have my copy right next to my desk. It's the Pocket Guide to Interpersonal Neurobiology. You have to have a big pocket for it to fit in your pocket. So it's not aptly named that way. But I think it's a really helpful book. And I'm going to use a couple of the models from that book as we continue our discussion today. First off, let's talk a little bit more about consilience. It's the discovery of common findings among independent disciplines. It's also the intellectual approach to the field of interpersonal neurobiology. A couple of definitions of consilience: the linking together of principles from different disciplines, especially when forming a comprehensive theory; agreement between the approaches to a topic of different academic subjects, especially science and the humanities. Thinking about the crisscross of how do we know something's true from a field of psychology and also a field of physics? When that would be a moment of consilience if we can align those two. In history and science, consilience, also known as convergence of evidence and concordance of evidence, refers to the principle that evidence from independent, unrelated sources can converge to strong conclusions. An example might be I could take out a tape measure and measure something in my backyard for building. I could also use a high-tech laser to measure it. Both of them would be from different sources, but they would have the same outcome. So I like to imagine this, a ball of consilience. I got this little ball. It's a little children's toy. Kids can hold it. But I like to imagine this as a metaphor for combining, diving into scientific fact and also your subjective experience. Imagine yourself climbing into the ball, joining your felt experience with the scientific knowledge you're exploring. As you learn something scientifically based about human experience, you consider how it applies to your own experiences. So imagine through the different holes, there was a line or a rod of one field, and then a different hole, a different line crisscrossed within the ball of a different field. That would be a consilience point. And then you're climb into it and explore it to see how it compares with your own experiences. There's nothing like experiencing something from the inside out to see if a claim of something being useful has validity. That's from Dr. Dan Siegel. So one of the first models I really keep in mind about this is the triangle of well-being. We're always within the triangle of mind, body, and relationships / environment. One of the things that really attracted me to the field of IPMB is how it gave relationships kind of equal footing in understanding human experience. You can see on the right-hand side, the triangle well-being. It's the harmony of integration is revealed as empathic relationships, a coherent mind, and an integrated brain. I use the term body because when they're using brain in this, they're talking about the extended nervous system, not just the skull brain. The brain is the mechanism of energy and information flow throughout the extended nervous system, distributed throughout the entire body. Relationships are the sharing of energy and information flow. The mind is the embodied and relational process that regulates the flow of energy and information. These are the three aspects that are irreducible of human experience, according to IPMB. The triangle well-being places the mind, brain, and relationships into a framework that illuminates their interdependent qualities. This empowers us to weave a range of academic pursuits and practical applications that makes these three facets of our human lives fully integrated. The triangle reveals three mutually influencing facets of one reality. So when we're talking about conflict, well, if your relationship with somebody has maybe hit a stumbling block, you can see in this model how it immediately would affect your mind and your body. That's why you get a feeling in the pit of your stomach, maybe if you're, if your relationship is struggling. There's a connectedness there. So that's a triangle of well-being, and I try to keep that in mind: mind, body, and relationships, tending to all three. Another really important thing is contingent communication. Contingent communication is a way in which the signals of one person are perceived, made sense of, and responded to in a timely and effective manner. Contingent responses based on affect, attunement, and sensitivity to another's nonverbal signals, combined with repair of ruptures in contingency when they occur, form the basis of secure attachment relationships. So contingent communication is really important when you're navigating conflict, because you want to pay attention with your whole body to what the person is saying and doing. It's the opposite of looking at your phone when you're having a conversation. And when you're trying to help somebody regulate, they need contingent communication to understand that you are perceiving all of their statements and listening with their whole body. It's a good example of this is why eye gaze is so important for infants. It's one of the earliest forms of contingent communication is looking into an infant's eyes and having them look back. That is, it's really important for them as they're forming early connections within their brain. And that's a really good example of crucial contingent communication. So here's a question. During this era of Zoom, contingent communication is much more elusive, right? If we were all in a room right now, I'd probably be pacing around a little bit and having a lot more full body involvement. How do you do good contingent communication when Zoom, especially if there's a conflict? What are some ways that you and others you have seen tried to overcome this? So right now in the chat, please type in any suggestions for contingent Zooming in the chat. That's a new term I came up with, contingent Zooming. How do we do that? I don't really have a good answer, but I'm curious to know what you think. So let's see. I see participate, look at the camera, keep the body straight with the camera on. One person that I went to a Zoom call with had people make little pictures of faces, and they would hold them up in different ways, which was a little bit more engaging than just checking in the chat. I see asking people direct questions, using their name, absolutely. Acknowledging people's pronouns is probably a good idea. Be in a location without distractions. Tone of voice, yes. Yeah, so I think that it's definitely different in this era. And so a lot of the contingent communication skills that maybe we have cultivated to help people in difficult situations, at least for me, I feel like they're less relevant. I do telehealth counseling now sometimes, and I really, in some ways, I have to work overtime to be able to communicate my compassion and care for people, because I'm not in the room with those other signals. And so I think that when that type of communication is crucial to de-escalation, and so it's missing in some degree, or at least it's more elusive in this Zoom era. So I think that's just something that's really relevant for our current times. So neuroplasticity, you're probably familiar with. It's the brain growth. It's the ability of the brain to change its structure in response to experience. This happens for situations ranging from joyful to threatening. A trauma-informed approach understands that some past experiences may create barriers for accessing traditional systems and seeks to eliminate or reduce those barriers. In what ways do you think your own brain has changed due to experiences of conflict? How about those we serve in our role at work?
Literally.
So one concept that I find helpful for this is name it to tame it. This came from Dr. Dan Siegel. Labeling a strong emotion helps calm the brain. Defining that placing a linguistic label on an internal or external process can help calm the mind and stabilize attention so that one can perceive with more clarity into the nature of the experience. So what have you helped someone identify and name strong emotion? Sometimes offering a non-judgmental term for what someone is struggling to express can help them both understand it and feel heard. In counseling, they teach about summarizing what someone has just said and reframing it back to them. And that's an example that can help somebody label a strong emotion. I find it internally really helpful as well. If I'm upset, if I can give myself, say, I know it, look at that, look what I'm feeling right now. Then it allows me to remember that my mind is on top of, metaphorically, on top of what that emotion is. And so that I'm not completely consumed by the emotion. So these are the 9 functions of the middle prefrontal cortex. You may be familiar with Dan Siegel's hand-brain model. They talk about things going offline when you flip your lid. These are some of the things that go offline, especially response flexibility, which has to do with maybe not reacting to someone's in a strong manner when you're experiencing conflict, but also the ability to have empathy for others and insight and emotional balance. So those are the things that when we get activated and the people we work with are activated are less accessible. Losing your cool or flipping your lid are metaphors for these 9 prefrontal functions going offline in response to a perceived threat. The crucial aspect of what some of these 9 mid prefrontal functions do is inhibit other parts of the brain. They help us hold back from responding in kind right away. So the term bite your tongue, right? Well, you know, your first instinct is to say something really strong back, but you bite your tongue. That's what those 9 prefrontal functions are helping you do. Inhibiting our immediate response and instead choosing how to respond is putting distance, time, between a stimulus and response. That's a pretty uniquely human ability, and you can cultivate that and develop it. This allows humans to have the ability to pause, response flexibility. I guess I should read a typo there, it looks like. Forgive me. It allows us to bring our whole brain into solving a problem. However, this ability isn't necessarily what's called for if under a real threat, a real life threat. In those situations, our immediate biological response is what keeps us alive. Get out of the way of that bus. This is no time for response flexibility. So what's the difference between flipping your lid versus having a staying alive moment in terms of an immediate response? We associate the phrase flipping our lid with a mismatch in response. It means losing your cool when it turns out that perhaps that wasn't the best approach after all. In other words, responding to one kind of a threat with another kind of response. Helping people understand how bodily systems meant to keep us alive activate, sometimes in ways mismatched to the situation, and that this can be viewed as an adaptive response, and that we can cultivate self and co-regulation has become a core aspect of my own work. What's your cool as a cucumber secret? So another important concept, just to touch on briefly, is mirror neurons. They're purported to allow us to understand another's intentions by firing the related neural network within us, yet inhibiting action. So it seems to allow for an empathic response by activating internally what another person is doing. What's the most predictable thing that is likely to happen if you lose your cool in an interaction? They will most likely reflect that same upset back to you, mirroring your response. Avoiding doing the same when someone else gets upset requires the resources to maintain response flexibility. Goes back to if I had my gratitude practice in the morning, I feel for myself like I have more of those resources. You might be familiar with polyvagal theory by Stephen Porges. Is bridging the gap between research, science, and the therapy room. I really like this book. It's pretty recent. It's another pocket guide that doesn't fit in your pocket. There is an initial book that was several years ago, but prior to that, all about the polyvagal theory. It explains the biological origins of a variety of social behaviors and emotional disorders. This book distills that theory into practical clinical tips, explaining its relevance to the social engagement system and offering clinical examples, including cases of trauma and autism. So I find this approach really helpful. And here's a really good slide that you can see. On the bottom is the social engagement system. Hopefully we're all in that right now. That's when we're able to have calmness and connection, openness to new experiences. We can find compassion. We can be mindful in the present. The reason it's called polyvagal is multiple vagal. So this is the a ventral vagal complex. We're using in the green zone, we're using our parasympathetic nervous system. You can see all that list of things that increase. It's where you rest and digest is another phrase for it. And then as someone starts to perceive a threat, they move up into the sympathetic zone where a sympathetic nervous system is activated. Starts with frustration, moves to irritation, can anger and rage, and eventually towards fight or flight. You can see the panic, fear, anxiety, worry, and concern. As your arousal increases, and the upper left, it says, I can. That's when you fight or flight. When you move beyond that to a life threat, that's where it says in the upper left, I can't. This is when your nervous system goes into the parasympathetic nervous system, but it's the dorsal vagal complex. And this is where people maybe when they get attacked, shut down entirely, which is a defense mechanism. You can see what decreases is your heart rate, your blood pressure, your temperature, your facial expressions, your responses. What increases is fuel storage, immobilization behavior with fear, endorphins that help numb and raise the pain threshold, and the conservation of metabolic resources. So when that occurs to somebody, that memory is going to stick. It's going to be right there with you. So I think this is a really helpful slide to understand how both activation and deactivation and wanting to take steps to stay in our social engagement system as much as we can, or at least when it's appropriate. Fight or flight is very appropriate. It's not that you don't want to get activated. That's what keeps us alive. But again, I'm interested in the mismatch of situations. If you go take a math test at my college and you start to feel the irritation, frustration, fear, panic, and your sympathetic nervous system gets activated, that's a mismatch because you're not really under a threat for taking a math test, but your heart rate's gonna increase, your palms are maybe gonna get sweaty. And so I'm really interested in the mismatch of activation kind of in the modern world. So how might you use the polyvagal theory? Well, you can reframe a mobilization response from a failure to fight back to the body's automatic and adaptive response to a life-threatening situation. Help someone label their internal escalation towards a fight or flight response so they can label it. Remember, name it to tame it. So helping someone understand this concept and how it can occur to them. It helps you by understanding how to foster a brain-safe environment, mindful of the varying ways people may get a neuroception of threat, such as creating a trauma-informed classroom environment or in the office lobby. So I've taken this to try to do a lot of different things so that when I teach a class, when the students walk in, maybe the memory of a teacher shaming them in the 7th grade that might be activated is still somewhat minimized. It's not, I'm trying not to re-traumatize them, because a lot of students, even if they haven't taken a class in 20 something years, that memory is right there with them. It's like it happened last week. And so understanding a little bit about what happens internally in our systems can help reduce that. Other ways to use the polyvagal theory, I came up with the phrase parasail to parasympathetic. So when you're in sympathetic nervous system, try to parasail, glide on down back into your parasympathetic. It brings a concrete model for de-escalation techniques for people that are skeptical of things like belly breathing. That used to be me when I was first in rehabilitation counseling school. I was like, jobs, we're going to get people jobs. I don't need to worry about deep breathing. And so I've really completely transformed my thinking around that to understand how it's the science behind it is linked to de-escalation and calm. Try to recognize when a mismatched neuroception of danger is initiated and allows for increased exploration of activating cues. So that's the polyvagal theory. It's time for a quick break. Please take 5 minutes and tend to your needs or relax. I'm gonna play you a musical interlude of a song about polyvagal theory. If you're interested, feel free to listen if you'd like, or to instead return for 5 minutes. In either case, please practice self-care. So I'm gonna stop sharing and I'm gonna share some lyrics, and feel free to take this 5 minutes to do whatever you'd like. You can pay attention to my quirky neuroception song if you would like. This is dedicated to Stephen Porges. It's about vertical integration in the modern world. A neuroception of safety keeps us in the social engagement system. A neuroception of threat activates us. I'm interested in neuroceptions of threat that are not actual, or that are perceived but not real, and helping people reduce those cues. So here you go. Neuroception, self-deception, travels up in one direction. Neuroception, misconception, happens when there's no exceptions. Neuroception, misperception, comes from early clutch connections. And a neuroception interception can bring about a fear deflection. If you listen up and think down, you've got to listen up and think down. Listen up and think down. Pay attention and hear your sound. Misperception, counter stance, a true view of current circumstance, flashly flooded, slow to drain. A higher view will help explain the body's betrayal of the fibers has you stressed. Watch for tigers, anxious signals, knock them down. Calm your mind, re-look around and listen up and think down. You gotta listen up and think down. You gotta listen up and think down and grow your own workaround. Neuroplasticity, neuroception, misconnection, an insurrection of perception, building up your introspection, helps to stop this false selection. When we build up a big collection of constant neural misperception, we close off people and affection, traveling in the wrong direction. Gotta listen up and think down. You gotta listen up and think down. You gotta listen up and think down. Inhibit that shit so you don't drown. What we need is a new inspection to rectify this cruel defection. Neuroception serves us well, but mostly when top thoughts can quell. You'll recall this song explicitly, cause it's looped into you cortically. When tigers roam, trigger this sound. Gotta listen up and I gotta think down. Gotta listen up and think down. I gotta listen up and think down. I gotta listen up and think down. I gotta hear my body and trust my crown. Gotta listen up and think down. You gotta listen up and think down. You gotta listen up and think down. You gotta hear your body and trust your crown.
I wish that was live. I mean, you know, maybe next year, Casey, you can do a round two with it, some in-person entertainment.
Oh, well, it's kind of fun to have a chance to get to talk about something where my nerdy brain science song is actually relevant. So thank you for enjoying that. And there you
That
go.
was wonderful. I want more. Encore.
Oh, thank you, Stephen. All right. So let me go back to sharing our slides after that brief brain break. Okay. So there's a cycle within relationships, according to the Dan Siegel's Pocket Guide to IPMB: connection, disconnection, dysregulation, reconnection, and repair. We are always watching up on the shores of rupture and repair. That phrase, that quote from Dan Siegel was really powerful for me because as someone who was conflict avoidant and really felt thrust into uncomfortable conflict in some of my earlier jobs, I felt like something was wrong if there was a conflict. And that continued on when I started, I had children. And if there was a conflict, something was wrong. And this reminded me that, no, we're always washing up on the shores of rupture and repair. And so it's not that it's wrong, it's actually human. And I don't need to think of it as a mistake. I need to think of it as a challenge to work through, perhaps, but not that that something's wrong with me if a conflict occurs, or that I should have necessarily been able to avoid all conflict. Another quote I really like is from Bonnie Badenoch: "You only need to have attuned communication some of the time. The rest is rupture and repair." So Bonnie Badenoch, if you don't know her, she's an IPNB author and trauma therapist as well. She lives up in Vancouver. She's wonderful. I took a couple classes from her in a year-long intensive and learned a lot from her as well. So let's see. So another important concept is the window of tolerance. Within the window, we experience integration. Dan Siegel's phrase for that is phases. We're flexible, adaptive, coherent, energized, stable. And that's within our window. We can also work to widen our window, and conversely, situations such as hunger or lack of sleep can narrow our window. There's lots of ways that we might narrow our window. I think about this, if I had a conflict with somebody in a workplace situation and it took a lot of my mental energy, and then I went to the next person that I was helping and another conflict occurred, well, my window would be smaller. It would be more narrow than it was before because it would have taken some of my resources. And if a third person came, I might be right on the bubble of losing my cool because how hard it would be to engage in that time and time again. So from the book, Pocket Guide to IPNB, our mental experience and our neural firing patterns for particular emotions or situations appear to have a span of tolerance in which we can function optimally. Within that span, within the window, we do well. Outside the window, we push beyond tolerable levels of arousal and move to either chaos or rigidity and lose our adaptive and harmonious functioning. So you can see at the top, there's chaos, and at the bottom, there's rigidity. And so we want to avoid that. Now, within that window, there's ups and downs, but you're able to stay regulated when you're within your window. And this is really helpful for me to think about people I work with that maybe you're struggling. It allows me to extend a little bit more empathy to them and say, oh, look, maybe they're outside their window of tolerance. That's why they're struggling, as opposed to their hurling an insult. The concept of chaos and rigidity is also really interesting. If you consider this just as an idea, the DSM has diagnoses for all mental health disorders. One idea that was purported is that, well, if we looked at from this lens, we could reclassify those as both as an example of either chaos or rigidity. So in this model, somebody that was experiencing a manic episode, that would be exceeding the window of tolerance and into chaos. Somebody that maybe was in a deep depression, having trouble getting out of bed, that might be an example of rigidity. And so you can look at the mental health diagnoses through this lens and see that there's a lot of similarity and a lot of validity to that. Self-care is an example of something that we can do to widen our window. In what ways do you widen your window? I said that before. What I do is I write a postcard in the morning. I made sure to do that this morning so that I was authentic. So writing, that's my gratitude practice. What other ways can you do to widen your window? Well, you can eat when you're hungry, or make sure you drink plenty of water, things for your body. You can make sure you're getting a type of exercise, connecting with others. There's all self-care is a way to widen your window. And conversely, you can do things that narrow your window. So we want to have a wide window so that we can stay cool as a cucumber even when difficult situations arise. Here's a slide that talks about the window of tolerance connected to the polyvagal theory we just learned about. So within the window of tolerance, this is when we're in our social engagement, which was the green zone. It used the ventral vagal. This is a state where emotions can be tolerated and information integrated. Hypoarousal on the bottom, which is the immobilization response, relative absence of sensation, the numbing of emotions, disabled cognitive processing, and reduced physical movement. That's below the window of tolerance. And above that would be hyperarousal, which is a sympathetic fight or flight response, increased sensations, hypervigilant, emotional reactivity, intrusive imagery, flashbacks, disorganized cognitive processing. So the window of tolerance and the polyvagal theory are consilient, as you can see by this slide. That's another example of consilience. Another interesting aspect of our minds and our bodies is the speed with which different parts operate. A signal from our body to our brain is much faster than our ability to process or think through what that signal means. Say we're taking a walk and we trip over a crack in the concrete. Our bodies will react with split-second speed, while our minds have to catch up to process what just occurred. Then we will store that memory so that we hopefully don't trip in the same place again. So the speed of our processing, the hyper quick speed of signals from the body, that neuroception of danger is immediate. Thinking through what that means is a lot slower and more clunky. Our thinking is a lot slower than our alertness. I like to think of it like this. A stimulus hits our bodies or a memory gets accessed, which is another word for that is mental priming, everything that's coming in before it comes to awareness. Then it gets processed in our minds, which we would call the present moment, which occurs slightly later. So the present moment is right now, but for a split second before I even said that word, there was mental priming involved that I was accessing a memory of my vocabulary, for instance. Then it gets stored in memory. So every moment kind of has a before, during, and after. This is just a framework for helping differentiate the speed of thinking versus the speed of your body's reactions. Your mind will always have to catch up to what your body knows. I think this is helpful when trying to practice mindfulness. What just occurred faster than I can think? This is a skill that can be cultivated in an attempt to increase the time between stimulus and response. Again, response flexibility, and helps me stay within my window when interpersonal intensity increases. I made a model including this and a few other IPMB concepts I'd like to share in the time that we have left together. I took inspiration from the field of vexillology, which is the study of flags, in this case, the study of flag design, which might seem a little bit odd, but bear with me. I got interested in flags and I decided I wanted to make my own. So flag design protocols indicate that a flag should be simple. So a child should be able to draw it from memory. It can't be super complex. It should include meaningful symbolism, which you get to determine, right? It should involve 2 to 3 basic colors, no more than 4, they say. And it should avoid lettering or seals, which means that the state of Oregon flag is not so great because it says Oregon on it. My favorite quote from the Portland Flag Association leader named Ted Kay is that if your flag has to have words on it, your symbolism has failed. And then lastly, it should be distinctive or be related. So it should be unique, or you should make it connected to something else, either way on purpose. It shouldn't accidentally look like something else. So those are the 5 protocols of flag design. I'm going to share a link towards the end to Good Flag, Bad Flag, which is put out by the Portland Flag Association. It's a really cool little pamphlet. So I wanted to create a flag that included symbolism for the before, during, and after of each moment, which is the thing I just described, because I got really interested in the body's speed with processing. I wanted to create a flag that included the window of tolerance. And I wanted to create a flag that had the triangle of well-being, as well as some other IPMB concepts. There are too many to discuss all of them here, but if you ever come visit me at the college or something, I'll talk your ear off all about it. The other thing about not using lettering or seals is if it's just an image is processed in your mind immediately. Think about a good flag. You should be able to recognize it 100 yards away flapping in the wind. If it has words on it, you can't do that. You can't read a flag. Also, words are a slower way to your brain than a picture. A picture is immediate. It uses right brain. Words are deciphered using left brain processing. They take longer to decode. So an image is faster to communicate than words. That's why they say a picture is worth 1,000 words, right? So here's the flag that I created. Oh, let me check the chat. I just saw that there was a message. Does someone have a question? It's not popping up for me. All right, anyway, sorry if I'm missing something about missing a chat thing, but Brent, help me out if I missed something. Current slide, here we go. So this is the flag that I created. The River of the Mind is an interpersonal neurobiology flag representing human experience in the flow of time. It uses metaphor to teach about the brain, creating a visual narrative of integration across mind, body, and relationships, cueing awareness and regulation. So the way it works is if you could follow my cursor, the top part is the mental priming part. So this is all the part that's faster than we can think. All the input from our bodies, from our minds, accessing a past memory or maybe a sensation from your body comes over here. And then the river, this is a river, it turns a corner into the present moment. And in the present moment, we could represent where your awareness might be. You might be daydreaming about the future. You might be reflecting upon the past. You might be paying attention to the present moment. But somewhere in this field, we could represent your mind in the present moment. Then it turns the corner again and goes down into this space, which is memory, whether that's explicit memory or implicit memory. And so the flag has a visual representation of before, during, and after for each moment. So the first thing about the flag is it's a cue to capture yourself in the present moment, to recognize that what just happened and memory, but capture yourself in the present moment. So it's a visual cue to be mindful. The next metaphor within it is the window of tolerance. You can see up here, this is would represent chaos above, and below here would represent rigidity. And so you want to be within the river, right? So that you're within your window of tolerance. And so that's that metaphor. The third metaphor that I'll share with you now is it's a triangle of well-being, which was represented by 3 stars. These types of 5-point stars are used in flags and a lot of international flags. And so that's why I chose them. But that represents the triangle of well-being. And the way I imagine this is that this is a kind of a perfect moment caught in time where the triangle is perfectly aligned in the middle of the river. But none of us are ever actually like that. We're close, we might be closer to rigidity or closer to chaos. We might be not in the middle. We might be lost in our thoughts about the future or the past. I like to think of this as an area that would be name it to tame it. If the flow of the river is getting blocked, you might have to name it to tame it to be able to let that pass through. I came up with another phrase, kind of the opposite on this end, which would be name it to illuminate it, which would be to try to be creative and think of new solutions or new ways of doing something. So the opposite of name it to tame it, which is calming, would be name it to illuminate it, which is being open and creating. So these are the 3, those are the 3 aspects that I'll share for right now that are represented within this flag. The phrase I came up with to help people remember this is stay in the river, my friend. So that means stay calm, stay collected, stay within your window of tolerance. And so it's a reminder and it's a visual cue with no words on it to do just that. So then at the bottom, roll back to the center when you breach upon the shore. Gather mind, set intention, and repair, unite, restore. So those are not unsurprisingly perhaps lyrics to a different song that I'll spare you from today. But it's a way to remember when that rupture and repair, where rupture is bound to happen. We're always washing upon its shore. And what I want to do is when a rupture occurs, when a conflict occurs, I want to roll back to the center. I want to roll back to being integrated. I want to roll back to being in the window of tolerance. So roll back to the center when you breach upon the shore, gather mind, set intention, and repair, unite, restore. So this is how I think about conflict management, is that I want to use this as a tool, a visual tool for myself to capture myself in the present moment, check myself against the window of tolerance, and pay attention to the triangle of well-being, my mind, body, and relationships. And I can think of all of those things immediately without words because it's a visual representation, and that is by design. So I had a real one made of these flags flying above my house right now at this very moment. I had it made at Elmer's Flag and Banner locally. And I do this so that I may be reminded to live authentically with the concepts I share with others. Because it's not for other people, it's for me. And then if I live authentically this way, then maybe, just maybe, some of these concepts can be relevant for other people. Despite much of our focus today on being on conflicts in the workplace, I found parenting to especially challenge my own ability to stay regulated, and the meaningful symbolism within the flag helps me to stay integrated at home as well as work. So I took that picture during a recent storm. I had to have a new flag made because flags don't last forever. My old one started to get pretty ratty. And it was really cool when I called Elmer Flag and Banner. They still had my design on file from a few years ago, and the person remembered me when I went to go pick it up. So that was pretty cool. So in summary, the key points I'd like to emphasize regarding conflict are: treat your past experiences as a gold mine of unique wisdom that you have to offer. Even the ones that were challenging, even the ones that were maybe as early jobs that you might have had many, many years ago. Remember those and treat them as opportunities to exercise the wisdom you have learned, sometimes painfully, in the future. Try to give others, especially those with differences from you, extra space for self-expression during conflict, even if that feels uncomfortable at times. Their past experiences are full of adaptive wisdom too, and feeling heard leads to calm. People from different cultural backgrounds and other situations have a lot of different ways of expressing conflict, and that doesn't mean that it's wrong if it's different from your own. So you want to make sure you make space for everybody to be able to express their conflict in a way that is heard. Find metaphors and symbolism around regulation that speak to you, or create your own if you wish. You are not limited to what is currently available to you. You can also create something and then give it symbolism. Something I learned that I thought was fascinating about flag design was that a lot of times somebody will design a flag and then decide what the metaphors and symbolism is. I thought you had to have it before. I thought you had to say, oh, these are the symbolism I'm going to use, and then I'm going to put that into a design. But I was struck to learn that it can be the other way around. And what that taught me is that you can make something, decide what it means, and then later get meaning from it. So I'm able to use that flag to capture meaning, even though it didn't used to exist. And so you can, it's a way to develop something enduring to help align yourself in your daily practices with the values you wish to live by. Remember to value all ways of knowing as part of your scientific, evidence-based approach to learning. So we want education that is scientific and evidence-based, but all ways of knowing includes your own experiences in the past, and those have value. Practice gratitude to foster the resilience you will later need. Sometimes later that same day, your tank will be fuller if you have practiced the type of self-care, specifically gratitude, but other types of self-care. Set boundaries and keep yourself emotionally and physically safe. Conflict management does not mean excusing bad behavior or, you can hold, a phrase I learned recently was compassionate accountability. So it doesn't mean that people don't need to be accountable if they just get angry. So you do need to set boundaries and keep yourself safe. And then last, be willing to go first when it is important to repair a rupture. If a rupture has occurred, I try to imagine myself having a speedy repair kit. And what can I do to quickly repair a rupture? So thank you for that. I have a few resources I'd like to share. I'm going to put them into the chat. The first one is Trauma Informed Oregon. I wasn't familiar with this organization until more recently, but I really learned a lot from them by doing some initial research. And I think that I also participated in a 4-module online training course, which was free. You can see there's 2 links there. The first one is for the organization. The second one is for the intro. You can do, doesn't take too long to do the 4 modules. They're really excellent videos. It's local, it's Oregon specific, and it has a lot of different voices represented, and it taught me a lot more about trauma-informed care and how that differs from trauma-specific interventions, and a sense of trauma sensitivity and how to avoid re-traumatizing people. So I highly recommend looking further into Trauma-Informed Oregon. Also, there's some other IP&B resources. The Global Alliance for Interpersonal Neurobiology Studies, that's called GAINS. I'm a member of that. and it's an organization that you can subscribe to, which I would recommend. Also, there's a Norton series of books, which is really, there's over 40 of them now, probably even quite a bit more than that. Where'd my little chat window go? Right when I want to put something in it. There we go. That's Mind Gains. And then the Norton series on interpersonal neurobiology books. That's where you'll find the pocket guides I just mentioned, and a lot of other great books. Bonnie Badenoch has a book there. There's also the MindSight Institute, which is Dr. Dan Siegel's institute that, of course, he came up with the phrase interpersonal neurobiology, and he and a few other pioneers developed the field. And so that's a really important resource as well. Some other ones are at Portland Community College. There is a interpersonal neurobiology program. It's continuing education. There'll be a cohort starting in the fall. I teach the intro class, Introduction to Interpersonal Neurobiology for PCC about once a year in that class. And there's a lot of great instructors and great coursework if you have an interest in that field. I'd like to acknowledge the really wonderful slide that I shared. It's from Ruby Jo Walker. She is a trauma therapist using polyvagal theory, and that's where I got that slide from. And also Bonnie Badenoch, as I mentioned, she is in the Northwest, Vancouver, is a published IPMB author and trauma therapist as well, and is really wonderful. So there's that. And then I know that not everybody might be interested in this, but I sure am. Some vexillology resources. This is a link to that good flag, bad flag. Looks like I messed up that link. Let me try again. Good flag, bad flag. It's a book on flag design. It's published by the Portland Flag Association locally. It's really excellent. It's you can just read. It's just a pamphlet, really, but it's lovely. And then something that I found very inspirational was a TED Talk by Roman Mars on flag design, and he uses the Good Flag, Bad Flag book to discuss flag design, and I find that really inspirational as well. So check it out. Second to last, I'd like to say that I'd love to meet all of you in person. You can reach me at kcs@clackamas.edu or 503-594-3186. Please feel invited to visit me at CCC's Oregon City campus when we return in person, perhaps fall of 2021. We're building a new building. It's almost finished, and it will house the counseling department. And I'd love to give anyone that's interested a tour of it and talk about the different ways that our work intersects. I'm trying to be a little bit more outward facing in my work in 2021 and beyond, connecting with other people in my community that serve similar populations. I imagine some of us, or maybe many of us, have served the exact same person, whether a student at Clackamas or engaging in some other agency locally. Of particular interest to me right now is an initiative called Pathways to Opportunity. I'm new to that. I've been learning about it, but it's a statewide initiative of connecting people with benefits to in a more cohesive way. So at the college, I haven't always known very much about how to connect people with some other food and resources and financial benefits other than the ones that are more traditionally at the college. And so I'm learning along with our Pathways to Opportunity work group about how to do a more cohesive job of connecting people with resources towards success. And so I welcome any possible partnerships towards that end. So lastly, I just want to say thank you, everybody, for choosing to spend the time with me today. I want to thank Brent Bollig and the Clackamas Workforce Partnership for inviting me. Warm regards, and thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Casey. And I'm going to stop the record button.